Your dentist has never seen a skull like this. It is 8,000 years old. It belongs to a young adult who never once held a toothbrush, never used toothpaste, never rinsed with mouthwash, and never sat in a reclining chair under a bright light while a stranger scraped at their gum line. And yet, when researchers examine the teeth inside this skull, they find something almost impossible by modern standards: minimal decay, healthy enamel, a jaw full of teeth that did exactly what they were supposed to do, right up until the end of this person's life. How? The answer is not what most people expect. It is not about some lost dental tradition or some special herb your ancestors chewed. It is about something far more fundamental, something that changed roughly 10,000 years ago and quietly dismantled one of the most robust biological systems your body had ever developed. Ancient human teeth were not healthy because ancient humans had good hygiene. They were healthy because of what ancient humans put in their mouths and what they did not. Let's start with what the fossil record actually shows. For most of human prehistory, covering hundreds of thousands of years of hunter-gatherer life before the invention of farming, rates of cavities, the clinical term for cavities, were extraordinarily low. Cavities occur when bacteria in the mouth consume sugar, produce acid as a byproduct, and that acid slowly dissolves tooth enamel. In skeletal populations from hunter-gatherer societies, researchers typically find cavity rates somewhere between 1 and 3% of teeth examined. In modern industrialized populations, that number sits between 60 and 90% over a lifetime. The difference is not trivial. It is civilizational. Christina Warinner is a molecular archaeologist at the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology in Germany, who has spent years studying ancient dental calculus, the technical term for fossilized tartar, the hardened plaque that builds up on teeth over a lifetime. Warinner's research, published in the early 2010s, revealed something that fundamentally reframed our understanding of the ancient mouth. The oral microbiome, the vast community of bacteria that lives in your mouth, was, in ancient humans, dramatically more diverse than it is today. Modern mouths are dominated by a narrow set of acid-producing species, particularly Streptococcus mutans, the primary bacterial driver of tooth decay. Ancient mouths were home to a far richer ecosystem of bacterial species, most of which were not caries-causing, and many of which actively competed against the decay-producing strains. The ancient oral microbiome was not less evolved than ours, it was more balanced. And we broke it. What broke it was not a failure of hygiene, it was a change in diet. To understand exactly when and how this happened, look at what paleoanthropologist Alan Goodman and his colleagues documented across decades of research comparing skeletal populations from before and after the adoption of agriculture. The pattern was strikingly consistent. Pre-agricultural hunter-gatherer skulls showed low cavity rates, strong jaw development, and relatively few signs of periodontal disease, the inflammation and infection of the gums and bone that is the leading cause of tooth loss in modern adults. Post-agricultural skulls told a different story. Within just a few generations of adopting grain-based farming, cavity rates climbed sharply. Jaw structures narrowed, crowding and misalignment appeared, conditions almost never seen in hunter-gatherer dentition. Agriculture did not just change what people ate, it changed the shape of the human face. But why? What specifically did farming introduce that was so catastrophic for teeth? The answer is refined carbohydrates, specifically foods that break down into simple sugars quickly. bread, porridge, cooked grain paste. Streptococcus mutans does not care whether the sugar it consumes comes from a bowl of refined sugar or a mouthful of chewed flatbread. What matters is the availability of rapidly fermentable carbohydrates, and early agricultural diets were built almost entirely on them. The bacteria thrived, acid output increased, the enamel suffered, and it never really recovered. There's a fascinating piece of evidence from a cave in northern Morocco called Grotte des Pigeons, studied by a team including Louise Humphrey of the Natural History Museum, London. Excavators found the teeth of people who lived roughly 15,000 years ago, well before agriculture, and discovered, surprisingly, significant rates of dental caries. At first, this seemed to contradict the hunter-gatherer dental picture, but closer analysis explained it. These particular people were living on a diet unusually rich in wild cereals and acorns, starchy, fermentable plant foods that the surrounding landscape happened to offer in great abundance. They were pre-agricultural, but they were eating like early farmers, and their teeth paid exactly the same price. The mechanism was identical. It was never about the toothbrush. It was always, entirely, about the sugar. So what did your ancient ancestors actually do to keep their mouths clean? The honest answer is that several mechanisms worked simultaneously without any of them being consciously understood as dental hygiene. The first was diet composition itself. A typical hunter-gatherer meal, fibrous roots, tough raw or lightly cooked meat, wild greens, nuts, seeds, the occasional seasonal fruit, required significant chewing effort. That effort produced saliva, which is one of the body's most underappreciated natural defenses against bacterial acid. Saliva is alkaline. It buffers the acid produced by bacterial oral systems and actively remineralizes enamel between meals. A diet that demands prolonged, effortful chewing keeps saliva flowing continuously. A diet of soft, rapidly consumed processed food does not. The second mechanism was abrasion. Ancient food was gritty. Stone-ground ingredients carried fine mineral particles. Raw vegetables and unprocessed plant fibers were physically tougher than almost anything most modern people eat in a week. This constant abrasive contact mechanically removed surface bacteria and food debris from tooth surfaces in a way that modern soft diets simply do not replicate. It was not gentle, and it did create its own costs. Many ancient skulls show severe tooth wear, sometimes right down to the inner pulp by middle age. Ancient teeth were not problem-free. They had different problems. Wear, not decay. Fracture and abrasion, not cavities. The biological threats were different because the dietary inputs were different. The third mechanism was something so simple it barely registers as technology: chewing sticks. Across Africa, the Middle East, and South Asia, archaeological and anthropological records going back tens of thousands of years document the use of fibrous plant stems as rudimentary dental tools, gnawed at the end until frayed, then rubbed along the teeth and gum line. The most studied of these comes from a plant called Salvadora persica, whose roots and twigs contain natural antibacterial compounds, silica particles that function as a gentle abrasive, and naturally occurring fluoride. Traditional communities across these regions still use miswak sticks today, and clinical studies comparing their effectiveness to modern toothbrushes have found the results surprisingly competitive. Your ancestors weren't brushing the way you brush, but they were doing something, and the material they were doing it with was chemically equipped for the job. So let's reconstruct a meal. It's roughly 20,000 years ago. You're sitting near a small fire at the edge of a woodland. You crack open a hard-shelled nut using 2 flat stones. You chew it slowly. It takes real effort. Then you tear into a piece of smoked meat, pulling the fibers apart with your back molars. Then you work through a partially raw root vegetable, which requires the kind of sustained grinding pressure your jaw was engineered for. No part of this meal is soft. No part dissolves in seconds. No part leaves a thin film of fermentable sugar coating every surface of your mouth. Your saliva is running continuously. The mechanical action of the food itself is moving gently across your enamel with every bite. Your oral bacteria are living in a balanced ecosystem where no single acid-producing species has been handed a monopoly and unlimited fuel. You finish eating and pick up a frayed twig from beside the fire. You rub it absently along your gum line the way you always do after a meal. It is not a ritual, it is just a habit, the way a modern person might run their tongue across their teeth without thinking about why. Your mouth will outlast any prediction a modern dentist could make for a modern adult.
On a modern diet, not because you are diligent, because the system was never broken in the first place. And here is a counterintuitive truth at the center of all of this. The cavity is not a natural consequence of having teeth. It is a symptom of a very specific dietary environment that most of human history simply never produced. For roughly 300,000 years, your body managed its own oral ecosystem without any outside intervention, not because ancient humans were more disciplined, but because the food they ate gave the acid-producing bacteria in their mouths almost nothing useful to work with. The decay-causing machinery was always present. The fuel just wasn't. You brush twice a day. You floss, you use an electric toothbrush and an antibacterial rinse, and you still sit in that chair every 6 months while someone finds something that needs fixing. Your ancestor gnawed on a stick and cracked nuts with flat stones, and their enamel lasted a lifetime. Your dentist has never seen a skull like theirs, but the answer written in those ancient teeth was never about dentistry at all. It was about what went in the mouth before anything needed cleaning.